3 seconds. That's how long it took for Alexandra Bennett to destroy her career and change her life forever. 3 seconds of looking into Damian Blackwell's ice-cold eyes and saying the one word no one had ever dared to say to his face. No. The glass conference room on the 47th floor of Blackwell Industries felt like a pressure cooker. Outside, Chicago stretched beneath them, a sprawling landscape of steel and ambition that glittered in the late afternoon sun. Inside, 6 assistants sat rigidly in leather chairs, their faces carefully composed masks of professional competence, while the man who controlled their futures paced like a caged predator. If you want to discover how a single moment of defiance transformed a struggling assistant into the woman who brought the most powerful CEO in Chicago to his knees, subscribe now. Leave a like if you believe that standing up for yourself is worth more than any paycheck. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose between your integrity and your job? Your presence here means everything. Damian Blackwell didn't just enter rooms, he conquered them. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, transforming a failing family business into a multinational corporation that made billion-dollar decisions before most people finished their morning coffee. His reputation preceded him like a storm warning. Ruthless, brilliant, impossible to please. The kind of man who fired assistants for bringing him the wrong brand of sparkling water, who expected emails answered at 3 a.m, who viewed empathy as a weakness and loyalty as a commodity to be purchased. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than Alexandra's rent for 6 months, and his dark hair was styled with the kind of precision that suggested he controlled even the smallest details of his appearance. But it was his eyes that truly unsettled people. Deep brown, almost black, they held a calculating coldness that could strip away pretense and expose every insecurity, every weakness, every lie. Those eyes were currently fixed on the assistant sitting 2 seats away from Alexandra, a nervous young woman named Jennifer, who was visibly trembling. "The Henderson file," Damian said, his voice low and dangerously quiet. "You were supposed to have it on my desk by 9 this morning. It's now 4:30. Would you care to explain?" Jennifer's hands shook as she clutched a tablet to her chest. "Sir, the legal department said they needed more time to review the contracts, and I thought—" "You thought?" Damian interrupted, stepping closer. "I don't pay you to think. I pay you to execute. The Henderson deal represents $200 million. Do you understand what happens when a $200 million deal falls apart because someone thought instead of doing their job?" The silence in the room was suffocating. Alexandra could see Jennifer's eyes filling with tears, could see the other assistants, looking anywhere but at the unfolding humiliation. This was Damian Blackwell's method. He didn't just fire people, he dismantled them first, ensuring everyone else learned the lesson. "You're finished," Damian said flatly. "Collect your things. Security will escort you out." Jennifer stood on shaking legs, a sob catching in her throat, and Alexandra felt something hot and fierce rising in her chest. She had been working as Damian's assistant for only 3 weeks, the newest addition to his rotating door of employees. She needed this job desperately. Her mother's medical bills were crushing her. Her student loans felt like a weight she'd carry forever. And positions at Blackwell Industries, despite the CEO's reputation, looked golden on a resume. But watching Jennifer's public destruction, seeing the casual cruelty with which Damian wielded his power, something inside Alexandra snapped. "That's not fair." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every head turned toward her. Damian's eyes, which had been dismissing Jennifer, slowly swiveled to lock onto Alexandra. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied her, with that predatory intensity that made people confess to crimes they hadn't committed. "Excuse me." His voice was silk over steel. "What did you just say?" Alexandra's heart hammered against her ribs. Every survival instinct screamed at her to back down, apologize, beg for mercy. But she looked at Jennifer's tear-stained face, thought about every person she'd seen destroyed by unchecked power, and found herself standing up. "I said it's not fair," she repeated, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Jennifer asked legal for an extension because the contracts had potential liability issues. She was protecting you, protecting the company, and you're firing her for doing her job correctly. The other assistants looked at Alexandra as if she'd just volunteered for a firing squad. Damien took a step toward her, his expression unreadable. "You've been here 3 weeks, Miss Bennett. 3 weeks. And you think you understand how I run my company?" "I understand basic decency," Alexandra shot back. "I understand that fear might get you compliance, but it doesn't get you loyalty or excellence. It just gets you people too scared to tell you the truth." Something flickered in Damien's eyes. Surprise? Anger? Interest? Alexandra couldn't tell. He moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woody that probably had a name she couldn't pronounce. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he asked softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Yes," Alexandra said, lifting her chin. "I've probably lost my job, but at least I can look at myself in the mirror tomorrow." For a long, terrible moment, Damien said nothing. Then he turned to Jennifer. "Sit down." Jennifer blinked, confused. "Sir?" "Sit down." Damien's tone left no room for argument. "You'll get your extension. The Henderson deal can wait 24 hours. He turned back to Alexandra, and there was something in his gaze now that hadn't been there before. Something that made her pulse quicken for entirely different reasons. "As for you, Miss Bennett," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "my office. Now." The walk to Damien's private office felt like a march to execution. Alexandra was acutely aware of his presence behind her, of the other assistants' pitying glances, of her own racing thoughts about how she was going to explain to her mother that she'd lost another job because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. Damien's office occupied the corner of the 47th floor, a massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Chicago. The decor was minimalist and expensive, all clean lines and dark wood, dominated by a desk that looked like it could double as a landing strip. He closed the door behind them with a soft click that felt ominous. "Sit," he commanded, moving to stand behind his desk. Alexandra remained standing. "I'd rather not get comfortable since I'm probably about to be fired." A smile, brief and dangerous, crossed Damien's face. "Do you ever follow instructions, Miss Bennett?" "When they make sense," Alexandra replied, then immediately regretted her tone. This man held her entire future in his hands, and she was antagonizing him like it was a sport. Damien leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest, studying her with that unsettling intensity. "Tell me something. Why did you apply to work here? Surely you'd heard the stories. Surely you knew what kind of man I am." "I heard the stories," Alexandra admitted. "I needed the job. But I didn't think the stories could possibly be entirely true. No one could be that. Ruthless," Damien supplied. "Cruel? Impossible." "Lacking in basic human empathy," Alexandra finished. "Though I'm starting to think the stories might have been understated." To her absolute shock, Damien laughed. It wasn't a warm sound, but it was genuine. A low rumble that transformed his entire face for just a moment, making him look younger, almost approachable. "Almost. You have no filter," he observed. "None whatsoever. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How refreshing?" "Refreshing?" Alexandra couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "I just contradicted you in front of your entire staff. Most bosses would consider that grounds for immediate termination. Most bosses aren't me." Damien pushed off from the desk, moving closer, and Alexandra fought the urge to step back. "I don't need yes men, Miss Bennett. I have plenty of those. They're a dime a dozen, interchangeable parts in a machine. What I need, what I've been searching for, is someone who will tell me the truth. Someone who won't let me make mistakes out of fear." He was standing close now, close enough that Alexandra had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see that his eyes weren't purely cold. There was something else there, something that burned beneath the ice. "You stood up for Jennifer," Damien continued, his voice dropping lower. "Not because you thought it would benefit you. In fact, you knew it would probably destroy you. You did it because it was right. Do you understand how dangerous that kind of integrity is? How powerful?" "I understand that integrity shouldn't be dangerous," Alexandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That says more about your company culture than it does about me." Damien's jaw tightened, and for a moment Alexandra thought she'd finally pushed too far. But then he stepped back, moving to the windows that overlooked the city. "My father built this company through fear," he said quietly, his back to her. "He believed that power came from keeping people off balance, from ensuring that everyone knew they were replaceable. When I took over, I continued his methods because they worked. Fear is efficient. Fear produces results." He turned to face her again, and there was something raw in his expression now, something vulnerable that seemed to cost him to show. "But fear also produces mediocrity. It produces compliance, not innovation. It produces employees who hide mistakes instead of fixing them. And I'm starting to wonder if my father's way, if my way, has been wrong all along." Alexandra felt her breath catch. This moment felt significant somehow, as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting in ways she couldn't quite comprehend. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because in 3 weeks, you've shown me more courage than people who've worked here for years," Damien said simply. "Because you looked at me, really looked at me, and you weren't afraid to see the truth. And because I think you might be the only person in this building capable of helping me change." "Change?" Alexandra repeated. "You want to change?" "I want to stop being the villain in my own story," Damien said, and there was such stark honesty in his voice that it made her chest ache. "I want to build something that lasts, something built on loyalty and excellence, not fear. But I don't know how. I've never known how." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, something equally transformative was happening, though neither of them quite understood it yet. "If I help you," Alexandra said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "If I agree to stay, to try to help you build a better company culture, I need conditions." Damien's eyebrows rose. "You're negotiating? You do realize you have no leverage whatsoever." "I have the truth," Alexandra countered. "I have the willingness to tell you things no one else will. That's the leverage. So here are my conditions. 1. No more public humiliations. If someone makes a mistake, you address it privately. 2. You listen when your employees tell you something isn't working. Really listen, not just wait for your turn to speak. And 3. You trust that the people you've hired are trying their best, even when they fall short." "Those are significant demands," Damien said, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "What makes you think I'll agree?" "Because you want to change," Alexandra said simply. "Because you're tired of being alone at the top, surrounded by people who fear you but don't respect you. Because somewhere beneath that armor, you know that there's a better way." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving her face. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. "Deal. But I have a condition of my own." Alexandra hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and sent an unexpected jolt of electricity up her arm. "What condition?" "You become my executive assistant, not just another member of the team, but my right hand. You sit in on every meeting, you challenge every decision you think is wrong, and you don't ever stop telling me the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes me." Alexandra swallowed hard. The position he was offering was huge, far beyond her experience or qualifications. It was also terrifying. Working that closely with Damian Blackwell, being responsible for speaking truth to power every single day would be exhausting. But as she looked into his eyes and saw the genuine desire for change there, saw the man beneath the reputation, she found herself nodding. "Okay," she agreed. "But if this goes badly, if you can't actually handle the truth, I reserve the right to say, 'I told you so.'" That dangerous smile crossed Damian's face again. "Miss Bennett, something tells me you'd say it anyway, regardless of whether you'd reserved the right." He was right, of course, and as Alexandra left his office that evening, her hand still tingling from where he'd held it, she had no idea that she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a job. She'd agreed to see him, truly see him, in a way no one else ever had. And being seen, truly seen, changes everything. The first week of Alexandra's new position was baptism by fire. Damian hadn't been exaggerating when he said he wanted her in every meeting. She sat through board presentations where men twice her age looked at her like an unwelcome intruder. She reviewed contracts that made her head spin with legal jargon. She fielded calls from executives in Tokyo, London, São Paulo, learning to navigate time zones and cultural expectations while running on 4 hours of sleep and coffee that tasted like battery acid. But the hardest part wasn't the work, it was Damian himself. He was brilliant, there was no denying that. The way his mind worked was almost frightening, connecting patterns and seeing opportunities that others missed entirely. But he was also demanding in ways that went beyond professional expectations. He wanted her input on everything, challenged her constantly, pushed her to defend her positions with logic and data. And he watched her. God, did he watch her? Alexandra would look up from her laptop to find his dark eyes fixed on her, studying her expressions as she read through reports. She'd be explaining a concern about a vendor, and his gaze would drop to her lips, then snap back to her eyes, as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. The awareness between them was a living thing, crackling in the space whenever they were alone. It was a Thursday evening, nearly 8 o'clock, when everything shifted. They were in his office reviewing a problematic merger, the city lights sparkling below them like scattered diamonds. Alexandra had kicked off her heels hours ago, her feet tucked beneath her on the leather couch, while she worked through financial projections on her tablet. Damian was at his desk, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were far more distracting than they had any right to be. "This doesn't add up," Alexandra said, frowning at the numbers. "The valuation they're claiming doesn't match their actual assets. Either they're hiding debt, or someone's cooking the books." Damian looked up sharply. "Show me." Alexandra stood, padding across the office in her stockinged feet, tablet in hand. She leaned over his desk, pulling up the relevant spreadsheets, acutely aware of how close they were. She could smell his cologne again, that same woody scent that seemed to cling to everything in his orbit. "Here," she pointed, "and here. The numbers should align, but there's a $15 million discrepancy that they're trying to bury in operating expenses." Damian leaned closer, studying the screen, and his shoulder brushed against hers. The contact, innocent as it was, sent heat flooding through Alexandra's body. She tried to focus on the numbers, on the professional issue at hand, but she was intensely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from him, of the way his breath stirred the hair near her temple. "You're right," Damian said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "I completely missed it. How did you catch this?" I spent 2 years as a forensic accounting intern during college, Alexandra replied, trying to keep her voice steady. You learn to spot creative bookkeeping pretty quickly. She started to straighten, to put some distance between them, but Damien's hand caught her wrist. Not hard, not demanding, just holding her there with the lightest pressure. You're brilliant, he said, turning to look at her. They were so close now that she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, could count his eyelashes if she wanted to. Do you know that? You're absolutely brilliant, and you hide it behind all that righteous anger and moral certainty. I'm not hiding anything, Alexandra whispered, unable to look away from his eyes. I think you are, Damien countered, his thumb tracing a slow circle on the inside of her wrist, right where her pulse was hammering. I think you're hiding how much you actually enjoy this. The challenge, the work, the battle. I think you're hiding how alive you feel when we go head to head. He was right, and they both knew it. Alexandra did love it. Loved the intellectual sparring. Loved the way he made her think faster and argue better. Loved the feeling of being necessary, of making a real difference. And God help her, she loved the way he looked at her, as if she were the most fascinating puzzle he'd ever encountered. This is a bad idea, she said, but she didn't pull away. Terrible, Damien agreed, but his hand was sliding up her arm now, leaving fire in its wake. Completely inappropriate. I work for you. I'm aware. The power dynamic is problematic. I know. But he was standing now, and somehow Alexandra was pinned between him and his desk, her heart racing, her breathing shallow. Every rational thought in her head was screaming at her to step back, to maintain professional boundaries, to protect herself. But there was nothing rational about the way she felt in this moment. Tell me to stop, Damien said, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. Tell me this crosses too many lines, and I will. I'll step back, and we'll pretend this never happened. Alexandra knew she should say it, should be the reasonable one, the one who maintained boundaries. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something there that stopped her. Vulnerability. Real, genuine vulnerability. The armor was gone, and she was seeing the man beneath, the one who was just as terrified and confused by this thing between them as she was. I can't, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I should, but I can't. Damien's exhale was shaky. Thank God, he whispered, and then his lips were on hers. The kiss was nothing like Alexandra had imagined. Not that she'd been imagining kissing her boss, except she had been, late at night when she couldn't sleep, when the memory of his intense gaze made her skin feel too tight. But imagination couldn't have prepared her for the reality. Damien kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and devastating precision. His hands cradled her face, as if she were something precious, something that might break, while his mouth moved against hers with a hunger that made her knees weak. Alexandra's hands found his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath the expensive fabric of his shirt, and she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she'd been denying for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that, he said, his voice rough. Since the moment you told me no in that conference room, since the moment you looked at me like I was just a man, not a title or a bank account or a reputation. You were just a man, Alexandra said, her fingers curling into his shirt. A complicated, frustrating, occasionally infuriating man, but just a man. No one's ever made me feel like just a man before, Damien admitted, and there was such raw honesty in his voice that it made Alexandra's chest ache. Everyone wants something. My money, my influence, my connections. But you You fight me at every turn. You challenge me. You make me earn every inch of ground. Because you need to be challenged, Alexandra said, pulling back enough to look at him properly. You're so used to people agreeing with you, following your orders without question, that you've forgotten how to truly collaborate. You've forgotten that the best ideas often come from conflict, from pushing back against assumptions. Damien's hand slid from her face to her waist, anchoring her against him. Is that what we're doing? Collaborating? Among other things, Alexandra replied, and she could feel her cheeks heating at the admission. They stood like that for a long moment, the city glittering below them, holding each other in the soft lamplight of his office. Finally, reluctantly, Alexandra stepped back, putting some necessary distance between them. We need to talk about this, she said, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. About what it means, what the rules are. Rules. Damien's lips quirked into a half smile. You want to establish rules for whatever this is between us? Yes, Alexandra said firmly, even as her body protested the distance she'd created. Because I won't be another conquest, Damien. I won't be the assistant you sleep with, and then discard when the novelty wears off. I've worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let that happen. The smile faded from Damien's face. Is that what you think this is? A conquest? I don't know what this is, Alexandra admitted. That's the problem. A week ago, you were my terrifying boss. Now you're... I'm what? Damien prompted when she trailed off. Alexandra took a deep breath. You're someone who makes me feel things I shouldn't feel. Someone who challenges me and frustrates me and makes me want to simultaneously strangle you and kiss you. And that's terrifying, because I need this job. My mother's medical bills aren't going to pay themselves, and positions like this don't come along twice. Understanding dawned in Damien's eyes. Your mother is sick. It wasn't a question. Terminal cancer, Alexandra said, the words still hard to say even after 2 years. Stage 4. She's stable now. But the treatments, the medications, they're not covered by insurance. I send home almost everything I make to help pay for her care. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I don't want pity, Alexandra said fiercely. I don't want special treatment, or for you to keep me on out of sympathy. I want to be here because I'm good at my job, because I bring value, not because you feel sorry for me. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he moved to his desk, pulling out a business card and scribbling something on the back. Dr. Sarah Chen, he said, handing it to Alexandra. She's the head of oncology at Northwestern Memorial. She specializes in experimental treatments. Call her tomorrow. Tell her I referred you. Alexandra stared at the card, then at him. I can't accept this. It's not charity, Damien said quietly. It's me using the resources I have to help someone who matters to me. Your mother deserves the best care available. Let me help. Why? Alexandra's voice cracked. Why would you do this? Because despite what everyone thinks, I'm not actually heartless, Damien replied, and there was a hint of vulnerability in his voice. Because you've given me something no one else has. Hope, the possibility of change. And because when I look at you, I see someone who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders and never complains. Someone who stands up for others, even when it costs her. That kind of person deserves help. Tears burned in Alexandra's eyes. She'd been carrying this burden alone for so long, had gotten so used to the weight of it, that the offer of help felt almost overwhelming. I don't know what to say. Say you'll call Dr. Chen, Damien said, moving closer again. Say you'll let someone help you for once, instead of always being the one who helps everyone else. Alexandra looked down at the card in her hands, then back up at Damien. In this moment, with his guard completely down, She could see past the ruthless CEO to the man beneath. A man who hid his capacity for kindness behind walls of ice because showing vulnerability in his world was dangerous. A man who was lonely despite being surrounded by people. A man who wanted desperately to be seen as more than his reputation. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll call her." "Good." Damien's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "And for the record, this thing between us, it's not a conquest. It's not a game. I don't know what it is yet, but it's real, and I'm willing to figure it out if you are." Alexandra called Dr. Chen the next morning, and within a week, her mother had an appointment at Northwestern Memorial. The experimental treatment program Dr. Chen described offered hope where there had been none before, a chance at extending her mother's life beyond the grim prognosis they'd been given. When Alexandra tried to discuss payment, Dr. Chen simply smiled and said it had been handled. Alexandra knew exactly who had handled it, and the knowledge sat heavy in her chest, somewhere between gratitude and guilt. At work, things shifted into a new, complicated rhythm. Publicly, they maintained strict professionalism. In meetings, Alexandra challenged Damien's decisions when she disagreed, and he listened, really listened, in a way that surprised everyone. The atmosphere at Blackwell Industries began to change. Slowly, carefully, employees started speaking up in meetings. The turnover rate, which had been astronomical, began to decrease. People whispered in break rooms about how the CEO seemed different somehow, less terrifying, more human. But privately, when the office emptied and the city lights glowed below them, Alexandra and Damien existed in a world entirely their own. They worked late most nights, reviewing strategies and solving problems, but the work always gave way eventually to conversations that had nothing to do with business. Damien told her about his childhood, about a father who viewed affection as weakness and taught his son that power was the only currency that mattered. About a mother who left when he was 12, unable to withstand the coldness of her husband's world. About learning to armor himself against feeling anything at all, because feeling meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant destruction. Alexandra shared her own story about growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to give her daughter opportunities, about watching that mother sacrifice everything, only to have cancer steal her future just when things were finally getting easier, about the crushing guilt of sometimes resenting the burden, even while loving her mother fiercely. They learned each other in those quiet evening hours, learned that Damien secretly loved old movies, particularly film noir from the 1940s, learned that Alexandra could speak Italian fluently because her grandmother had immigrated from Sicily, learned that they both felt like imposters in their own lives, always waiting for someone to realize they didn't belong. It was a Friday night, nearly 10 o'clock, when Damien did something he'd never done before. "Come with me," he said, standing abruptly from his desk. Alexandra looked up from the contract she'd been reviewing. "Where?" "You'll see." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They rode the elevator down to the parking garage in silence, fingers intertwined. Damien led her to a black Aston Martin that probably cost more than most people's houses, and soon they were speeding through Chicago's streets, the city blurring past the windows. 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a building Alexandra didn't recognize. It was older, elegant in a way that spoke of old money rather than new. Damien used a key to access a private elevator, and they rode up in silence, the air between them charged with anticipation. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment, and Alexandra's breath caught. It was beautiful, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings, but what captured her attention were the windows. Floor to ceiling, they offered a 360-degree view of Chicago at night, The city spread out like a carpet of stars. "This is your home," Alexandra said, understanding. In all their conversations, Damien had never invited her here. His office had been their sanctuary, neutral territory. Bringing her here meant something. "I wanted you to see it," Damien said, quietly, standing behind her at the windows. "I wanted you to see me, really see me. Not the office, not the CEO, but the man who comes home to this empty space every night and wonders why success feels so hollow." Alexandra turned to face him. In the soft lighting of his apartment, wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of a suit, he looked younger, more vulnerable. "It's not empty tonight," she pointed out. "No," Damien agreed, his hands coming to rest on her waist. "It's not." He kissed her then, different from that first kiss in his office. This was slower, deeper, a kiss that spoke of wanting rather than hunger. Alexandra's hand slid up his chest, tangling in his hair, and she poured everything she couldn't say into that kiss. All the longing, all the confusion, all the terrifying realization that what she felt for him went far beyond attraction. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Tonight. Tomorrow. For as long as you'll have me. I'm tired of being alone." Alexandra knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart, maintain boundaries, think about the implications. But as she looked into his eyes and saw the same vulnerability, the same need for connection that she felt, caution seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Okay," she whispered back. "I'll stay." They moved to his couch, a sprawling thing that faced the windows, and talked until the city lights began to dim with approaching dawn. Damien told her about the pressure of maintaining an empire, about the constant fear that one wrong move would destroy everything his family had built. Alexandra told him about the terror of potentially losing her mother, about feeling like she was drowning in responsibility, while everyone else her age was living normal lives. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Alexandra's head dropped to Damien's shoulder, her eyes growing heavy. She felt his arm come around her, pulling her closer, and she let herself sink into the warmth of him. "I was so lonely before you," Damien murmured against her hair, his voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. "I didn't even realize how lonely until you walked into that conference room and looked at me like I was just a man who needed to be better." Alexandra woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the unfamiliar sensation of being held. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then awareness returned. Damien's penthouse, Damien's couch, Damien's arms around her, and she froze. They'd fallen asleep together, her head on his chest, his chin resting on her hair, their bodies intertwined as naturally as if they'd been doing this for years instead of hours. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and strong, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. In sleep, all the hardness had left his face. He looked peaceful, almost boyish, and Alexandra felt her heart do something, dangerous in her chest. She was falling for him. No, if she was honest with herself, she'd already fallen. Somewhere between challenging him in meetings and late-night conversations about childhood wounds, between watching him slowly let his guard down and feeling him see her in return, she'd tumbled completely, irrevocably in love with Damien Blackwell. The realization terrified her. Damien's eyes opened, and for a moment, they just looked at each other in the morning light. "Hi," he said softly, his voice rough with sleep. "Hi," Alexandra replied. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you." "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you either," Damien said, but he made no move to let her go. "But I can't say I regret it. I haven't slept that well in years." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, watching the city wake up through the windows. Finally, reluctantly, Alexandra started to pull away. I should go home, change, before the office. Or, Damien said, his hand catching hers, we could take the day off, both of us. When's the last time you had a Saturday that wasn't spent catching up on work or visiting your mother at the hospital? Alexandra couldn't actually remember. I don't think you're allowed to take days off when you're the CEO. One of the perks of being the CEO, Damien countered with a smile, is that I make the rules, and I'm making a new rule. We're taking today off. He stood, pulling her up with him. Have you had breakfast? I don't usually eat breakfast. Of course you don't. Damien shook his head. Come on, I'm going to cook for you. You cook? Alexandra couldn't hide her surprise. Damien laughed, that genuine sound she was starting to love. I'm full of surprises, Miss Bennett. You're just beginning to discover them. He led her to a kitchen that belonged in a magazine, all sleek surfaces and professional-grade appliances. To Alexandra's continued amazement, he actually knew what he was doing, moving around the space with practiced ease. My mother, he explained, cracking eggs into a bowl, was Italian. Before she left, before everything fell apart, she used to make breakfast every Sunday. It was the only time my father allowed her to do something that wasn't calculated for business advantage. She taught me because it was something we could share, something that was just ours. He spoke while he cooked, whisking eggs, slicing vegetables, his hands sure and capable. Alexandra sat at the kitchen island, watching him, and felt something shift in her chest. This was intimacy, she realized, not just the physical attraction that crackled between them, but this, watching him make breakfast in the morning light, learning about his mother, seeing the parts of himself he kept hidden from the world. They ate at his dining table, another expanse of windows providing the backdrop, and Alexandra couldn't remember the last time food had tasted this good, or a morning had felt this perfect. Tell me something, Damien said, setting down his coffee. What would you do if money wasn't an issue? If you could do anything, be anyone, what would you choose? Alexandra thought about it. I'd finish my MBA, she said finally. I had to drop out when Mom got sick. I was 2 semesters away from graduating. I'd love to complete it, to have that accomplishment for myself. What's stopping you? Time, money, energy, Alexandra listed. Take your pick. What if those weren't obstacles? Damien leaned forward, his eyes intense. What if I told you Blackwell Industries has a continuing education program? Full tuition coverage for employees pursuing advanced degrees, flexible scheduling to accommodate classes. I've never heard of that program. Because I'm creating it right now, Damien said. As of this moment, Blackwell Industries offers full educational support for any employee who wants to continue their education. You'd be the pilot participant. Alexandra stared at him. You can't just create a company program because you want to help one person. Watch me, Damien said. I own the company, and honestly, it's a good idea anyway. Investing in employee education, improving retention through professional development. It's smart business. That's not why you're doing it. No, Damien admitted. I'm doing it because you deserve to finish what you started. Because watching you sacrifice your dreams for everyone else kills me. Because I want to give you something that matters. Tears pricked at Alexandra's eyes. I don't understand you. 1 minute you're this ruthless CEO who fires people for minor mistakes, and the next you're creating educational programs and helping with medical bills. Maybe I'm trying to be the man you see when you look at me, Damien said quietly. Maybe I'm tired of being the villain. Maybe you've shown me that there's another way to be powerful, that strength doesn't have to come from fear. He reached across the table, taking her hand. You've changed me, Alexandra. In 2 months, you've changed everything. The way I think, the way I lead, the way I see myself. I'm not saying I'm perfect now. I still mess up, still fall back into old patterns. But I'm trying. For you, for the company, for myself. I'm trying to be better. You're better, Alexandra said, squeezing his hand. You just needed someone to believe you could be. They spent the day together, doing simple things that felt extraordinary. They walked through Millennium Park, bought coffee from a street vendor, browsed a bookstore in Wicker Park. Everywhere they went, Damien was different from the man she'd first met. He smiled more, laughed more, seemed lighter somehow, as if he'd set down a weight he'd been carrying for decades. In the bookstore, Alexandra found him in the classic film section, carefully examining a book about Italian neorealism. For you? She asked, coming to stand beside him. For my mother, Damien said softly. Her favorite films were from this movement. She used to say they showed real life, real people, in a way Hollywood never could. I thought, maybe if I understood what she loved about them, I might understand why she couldn't stay. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost like normal life, except there was nothing normal about being in love with Damien Blackwell. At work, they maintained their professional dynamic, though anyone paying close attention might have noticed the way his gaze lingered on her during meetings, or the small smile that played at her lips when he made a particularly sharp observation. The changes Damien had begun to implement were taking root. Department heads reported that employees seemed more engaged, more willing to share ideas. The company's quarterly results showed improved productivity and decreased turnover costs. Even the board noticed, though they attributed it to Damien's leadership rather than the woman standing beside him, challenging him to be better. Alexandra had enrolled in her MBA program, taking evening classes 2 nights a week. True to his word, Damien had created the Continuing Education Initiative, which 3 other employees had already applied for. He'd adjusted her schedule to accommodate her classes, and never once complained when she had to leave meetings early or arrive late because of her coursework. Her mother's treatment was progressing better than anyone had expected. Dr. Chen's experimental protocol was working, pushing back the cancer in ways the previous treatments hadn't managed. When Alexandra called with updates, her mother's voice was stronger, more hopeful. You sound different, her mother said during one call. Happy? I am happy, Alexandra admitted, glancing across the office to where Damien was on a conference call, gesticulating as he made some point. Things are good, Mom. And this boss of yours, the one who's paying for my treatment? Her mother's voice was knowing. Is he part of why things are good? Alexandra felt her cheeks heat. It's complicated. Love usually is, her mother said gently. But honey, don't let fear stop you from being happy. You've spent so long taking care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for once. But fear did complicate things. Alexandra was terrified of what would happen when, not if, their relationship became public. Terrified that people would think she'd slept her way into her position, that they'd discount everything she'd accomplished. Terrified that the board would force Damien to choose between her and the company. Most of all, she was terrified that this perfect bubble they'd created couldn't last in the real world. Those fears came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon when Margaret Chen, the head of HR, requested a private meeting. Alexandra sat across from her, stomach churning, knowing what was coming. There have been questions, Margaret began carefully, about your relationship with Mr. Blackwell. Several employees have noticed that you spend significant time alone with him, that he treats you differently than other assistants. I'm his executive assistant, Alexandra said, keeping her voice steady. My job requires me to work closely with him. I understand that, Margaret replied. But there are concerns about favoritism, about whether your recent promotion and educational benefits are merit-based or, well, based on something else. Heat flooded Alexandra's face, anger and shame mixing. I earned my position. Every recommendation I've made, every strategy I've suggested has been proven successful. The metrics speak for themselves. I believe you, Margaret said. But perception matters. And the perception is starting to damage both your reputation and Mr. Blackwell's. I wanted to make you aware of the situation before it escalates. Alexandra left the meeting shaking. She went straight to Damien's office, closing the door behind her. "We have a problem," she said, and explained Margaret's concerns. Damien's face darkened. "Let them talk. You've earned everything you have." "Have I?" Alexandra challenged. "How can I know for sure? Would you have promoted me if we weren't involved? Would you have created the education program?" "Yes," Damien said firmly. "Alexandra, you're the best executive assistant I've ever had. You challenge me. You catch mistakes. You understand the business in ways that people with decades more experience don't. Your relationship with me has nothing to do with your professional value." "But no one else knows that," Alexandra said, and she could feel tears threatening. "To them, I'm just another woman who got ahead by sleeping with the boss. Everything I've worked for, every achievement, will be dismissed as favoritism." Damien stood, coming around his desk to her. "Then we'll make them see the truth. We'll be transparent about our relationship. Let them scrutinize your work. When they see how much you contribute, they'll understand." "Or they'll pressure you to fire me," Alexandra countered. "The board won't like this, Damien. They'll see me as a liability, a potential lawsuit waiting to happen." "I don't care what the board thinks." "You should," Alexandra said. "This is your company, your legacy. I won't let what we have destroy that. And I won't let fear of what others think destroy what we have," Damien replied fiercely. "I've spent my whole life caring about perception, about maintaining the right image. I'm done with that. I choose you, Alexandra, publicly, privately, in every way that matters." But choosing each other didn't make the problem disappear. Over the next week, the whispers grew louder. Alexandra overheard conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. People who had been friendly became distant. A gossip blog that covered Chicago business news ran a blind item about a CEO and his assistant, and everyone knew who they meant. The board called an emergency meeting. Damien attended alone, refusing to let Alexandra be subjected to their interrogation. He was gone for 3 hours, and when he returned, his face was granite. "They want you gone," he said flatly. "They've given me an ultimatum. Either you resign, or they'll call for a vote of no confidence." Alexandra felt the floor drop out from under her. "Then I'll resign." "No. Damien, you can't lose your company because of me." "I won't lose you because of them," he countered. "I told them to call their vote. I told them that I'd rather walk away from Blackwell Industries than compromise on this." "You can't be serious," Alexandra breathed. "This company is everything to you. It's your family legacy, your entire identity." "It was," Damien agreed. "But you showed me that I'm more than what I build, more than profit margins and market share. You showed me what actually matters: human connection, integrity, love. I won't sacrifice that, not even for Blackwell Industries." The vote of no confidence was scheduled for the following week, which gave them 7 days to either convince the board or prepare for the fallout. Alexandra spent those days in a state of controlled panic, working longer hours than ever, documenting every decision she'd influenced, every strategy she'd contributed to, building a case for her professional value. Damien was a force of nature, calling in favors, meeting with individual board members, making it clear that if they pushed him out, he'd take his best ideas and his key relationships with him. The night before the vote, they were in his penthouse, surrounded by documents and laptops, working late into the night. Alexandra's eyes burned with exhaustion. and she could see the same fatigue in Damien's face. "You should eat something," he said, setting aside his work. "You haven't touched food since breakfast." "I'm not hungry, Alexandra." He moved to sit beside her on the couch, gently closing her laptop. "Starving yourself won't change the outcome tomorrow." "I know," she said, her voice cracking. "But I can't. I can't lose you, Damien. I can't be the reason you lose everything you've built." "You're not the reason," Damien said firmly, pulling her into his arms. "The board's outdated thinking is the reason. A corporate culture that values appearance over substance is the reason. Not you. Never you." Alexandra buried her face in his chest, breathing in his scent, trying to memorize this moment. "What if they vote you out? What happens to us then?" "Then we figure it out," Damien said simply. "I start something new. You finish your MBA. We build something together. Something that doesn't require us to hide or compromise who we are." "You make it sound so simple." "Maybe it is," Damien said, tipping her face up to look at him. "Maybe we've been making it more complicated than it needs to be. I love you, Alexandra. I'm in love with you. And I'd rather have you and nothing else than have everything without you." The words hung in the air between them, transformative and terrifying. "I love you too," Alexandra whispered, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff. "I've been trying not to, trying to be practical and protect myself, but I love you so much it scares me." Damien kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. Promise me you won't try to sacrifice yourself to save me." "Only if you promise the same thing," Alexandra countered. "Deal." The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. Alexandra wasn't allowed to attend, which meant she spent the hours beforehand, pacing in her office, unable to focus on anything. At 1:30, her phone rang. It was her mother. "I had a feeling you needed to hear this today," her mother said. "Your father used to tell me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's loving something enough to be afraid, and choosing it anyway." "I'm terrified, Mom." "Good," her mother said. "That means what you have is worth being terrified for. Now go be brave. Show them who you are." At 2 p.m., Alexandra watched through her office window as board members filed into the conference room. She could see Damien standing at the head of the table, tall and commanding, every inch the CEO. Whatever happened in the next hour would change everything. The hour stretched into 2, then 3. By 5 p.m., Alexandra was ready to climb the walls. Finally, at 5:30, her office door opened. Damien stood there, and she couldn't read his expression. "The vote," she started, her heart in her throat. "Was 7-5 in my favor," Damien finished, and a smile spread across his face. "We won." Alexandra felt her knees go weak. "What? How?" "I presented your contributions to every major deal we've closed in the last 2 months, Damien explained, coming into the office and closing the door. "I showed them the financial impact of your strategies, the employee satisfaction scores since you started influencing company culture. And then I told them that if they couldn't see your value, if they were so stuck in the past that they'd sacrifice excellence for appearances, then I didn't want to lead a company like that anyway." "And they listened?" "Not all of them," Damien admitted. 5 board members voted to remove me, but 7, including James Hartford, who's usually my biggest critic, voted to keep me on. Hartford actually stood up and said that any woman who could improve our Q3 margins by 12% while handling a personal crisis deserved to be judged on merit, not gossip. Tears of relief flooded Alexandra's eyes. "I can't believe it." "Believe it," Damien said, pulling her into his arms. "You did this, Alexandra. Your work, your integrity, your refusal to compromise. You proved them wrong." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the weight of stress and fear finally lifting. "So what happens now?" Alexandra asked. "Now," Damien C.A. said, pulling back to look at her, "we do this right. I'm calling a company-wide meeting tomorrow to announce that we're in a relationship. HR is going to implement new policies about workplace relationships, transparency requirements, oversight to prevent favoritism, everything above board, everything ethical. You thought this through." "I had 3 hours while the board deliberated," Damien said with a slight smile. "I made a list. Also, I want you to know that your performance will be reviewed by an independent consultant quarterly. Not because I doubt you, but because I want there to be no question about your merit." That's actually really smart," Alexandra said. "I'm occasionally smart," Damien replied, "usually when you push me to be." They left the office together that night, not hiding their joined hands, not caring who saw them leaving in the same car. The battle wasn't over. Alexandra knew there would still be whispers, still be people who doubted her. But for the first time, she felt like they could handle it together. The company-wide announcement the next day was exactly as uncomfortable as Alexandra had anticipated. Standing beside Damien in the main auditorium, while he explained their relationship to 300 employees, felt like being on display, vulnerable and exposed. But Damien's hand found hers under the podium, a steady anchor, and she held her head high. To her surprise, the response was mostly positive. Some employees looked skeptical, others clearly disapproved, but many more seemed genuinely happy. During the Q&A session, Jennifer, the assistant Alexandra had defended in that first meeting, stood up. "I just want to say," Jennifer began, her voice shaking slightly, "that Alexandra saved my job when anyone else would have let me get fired. She stood up for what was right, even though it could have cost her everything. That's not someone who's here because of favoritism. That's someone who actually cares." The applause that followed wasn't universal, but it was real. Alexandra felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by the unexpected support. Over the next weeks, life settled into a new normal. Alexandra moved through the office with her head high, proving herself again with every successful negotiation, every strategic insight, every problem solved. The quarterly review by the independent consultant was glowing, noting her exceptional contributions and recommending her for additional leadership responsibilities. Her MBA program was progressing well. She'd discovered a talent for strategic management and was already thinking about potentially teaching one day, sharing what she'd learned with the next generation of business leaders. Best of all, her mother's scans came back clear. Complete remission. Dr. Chen called it remarkable, a testament to the experimental treatment's effectiveness. When Alexandra shared the news with Damien, he held her while she cried with relief, understanding the weight she'd been carrying for so long. It was a Saturday in November, 6 months after that first confrontation in the conference room, when Damien took her back to the small Soho cafe where they'd first really talked. The same cafe where he'd once hidden from his own reputation, where she'd studied for exams between hospital visits. They sat at the same table in the corner, coffee growing cold while they talked, just like that first afternoon. "Do you remember," Damien said, his fingers playing with hers on the table, "when you told me that fear might get compliance but not loyalty?" "I remember you looking at me like I'd grown a second head," Alexandra replied with a smile. "I thought you were going to fire me on the spot." "I nearly did," Damien admitted. "But then you said that thing about people being too scared to tell me the truth, and something in me broke. Or maybe something finally started to heal. I realized I'd been so busy building walls that I'd forgotten how to let anyone in. And now? Now I don't want walls," Damien said. "I want truth. I want challenge. I want someone who sees me, really sees me, and loves me anyway. I want you, Alexandra. Not just for now, but forever. He shifted, and Alexandra's breath caught as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring. It was beautiful, elegant, and understated, a single emerald surrounded by small diamonds. It reminded me of you, Damien explained, his voice unsteady. Strong and rare, and absolutely unique. Alexandra Bennett, you changed my life the day you told me no. You made me want to be better, made me believe I could be better. You showed me that real power comes from connection, not control. Will you marry me? Alexandra looked at the ring, then at Damien, seeing past the polished exterior to the man beneath. The man who'd learned vulnerability, who'd chosen love over fear, who'd stood beside her when it would have been easier to walk away. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course, yes. Damien slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her into a kiss that made the other cafe patrons applaud. When they broke apart, both laughing and crying simultaneously, Alexandra felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. I have a condition, though, she said, wiping away happy tears. Another negotiation? Damien asked, his eyes bright with amusement and love. Always, Alexandra confirmed. When we tell people, I don't want the story to be that the CEO fell for his assistant. I want it to be that two people found each other, challenged each other to be better, and built something real together. Equals. Partners. We are equals, Damien said seriously. In every way that matters. Actually, I'd argue you're better than me. You're certainly a better human. I'm not better, Alexandra said. I'm just different. And together, we're balanced. Your strategic thinking and my ethical grounding. Your drive and my perspective. Your past and my future. We make each other whole. We do, Damien agreed, pulling her close. God, we really do. They stayed in that cafe for hours, talking about the future, about wedding plans and career goals, and the life they'd build together. About continuing to transform Blackwell Industries into a company people wanted to work for, not one they feared. About Alexandra potentially taking on a VP role eventually, earning it through demonstrable results. About starting a foundation focused on making cancer treatment accessible, so other families didn't have to choose between medical care and financial survival. As the afternoon faded into evening, Alexandra looked around the small cafe that had become the setting for so many pivotal moments in their relationship. We should buy this place, she said suddenly. What? Damien laughed. This cafe. We should buy it, Alexandra repeated, warming to the idea. Keep it exactly as it is, maybe just update the coffee machine. Make sure it stays here, stays accessible. It's where we found each other. It should be preserved. Damien studied her for a moment, then pulled out his phone. Done. I'll have my real estate attorney draw up an offer on Monday. Just like that. Alexandra shook her head, amused. Just like that, Damien confirmed. One thing I've learned from you is that when something matters, you don't hesitate. This place matters. Our story matters. So, yes, just like that. 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Alexandra's mother, healthy and radiant, cried through the entire event. Damien's estranged mother, whom he'd reconnected with after Alexandra encouraged him to heal that old wound, sat in the front row looking proud. The guest list was small, intimate, just the people who truly mattered. Jennifer was there, now promoted to department head after showing exceptional leadership. Dr. Chen attended, having become a friend to both of them. Several Blackwell Industries employees who'd been brave enough to embrace the company's new culture came to celebrate. Margaret from HR made a toast about how sometimes the most unprofessional relationships lead to the most professional transformations, which got a big laugh. But the moment that mattered most to Alexandra came during their first dance. As they swayed together under string lights, Damien whispered in her ear, "Thank you for telling me no that day. Thank you for seeing past the armor to the man who desperately needed someone to challenge him." "Thank you for listening," Alexandra whispered back. "Thank you for being brave enough to change." The months that followed were far from perfect. There were still challenges at work, still people who questioned Alexandra's position, still moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But they faced everything together, with honesty and communication, and a commitment to being better. Alexandra completed her MBA with honors, her thesis on ethical leadership in corporate culture, earning recognition from the business school. Damien instituted sweeping changes at Blackwell Industries, transforming it into one of Chicago's most sought-after employers. Their Cancer Foundation funded research and provided financial assistance to families struggling with medical costs. And the little Soho cafe remained exactly as it was, a reminder that the most extraordinary transformations often begin in the simplest places. 1 year after their wedding, Alexandra discovered she was pregnant. She told Damien on a rainy afternoon in his office, both of them remembering that first day when rain had brought them together. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her hand on her still flat stomach. "Terrified of balancing a baby and my career. Terrified of whether I'll be a good mother. Terrified of everything changing." "I'm terrified too," Damien said, his hand covering hers. "But we'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." Together, Alexandra agreed, and in that single word was everything they'd built, every challenge they'd overcome, every choice they'd made to see each other, truly see each other, and choose love. The baby arrived on a spring morning, a girl with Alexandra's determined chin and Damien's dark eyes. They named her Maria, after Damien's mother, a gesture of healing and hope. When Damien held his daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Alexandra watched the last of his armor finally fall away. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's real," Alexandra corrected gently. "Perfectly imperfect, beautifully human, exactly as she should be. Just like us." Watching him cradle their daughter, seeing the gentleness in his touch and the wonder in his eyes, Alexandra thought about that day in the conference room when she'd said no, how terrified she'd been, how certain she was about to destroy her career. She couldn't have known then that her refusal would lead to this, to standing in a hospital room, watching the man she loved become a father, to building a life that honored both ambition and integrity. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it costs you everything. Sometimes standing up for what's right leads you to exactly where you're meant to be. And sometimes the person who seems the most impossible to reach is just waiting for someone brave enough to try. 5 years later, Blackwell Industries had become a case study in corporate transformation, held up as an example of how ethical leadership could coexist with financial success. Alexandra had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, her appointment based on 5 years of documented excellence and a rigorous external review process that left no room for doubt. She'd also begun teaching 1 class per semester at Northwestern, sharing her experiences with MBA students who hung on every word. Damien had stepped back slightly from day-to-day operations, finding that he preferred strategic planning to operational management. He'd discovered a passion for mentoring young entrepreneurs, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them avoid the mistakes he'd made and embrace the lessons he'd learned. Their daughter Maria was bright and fierce, with her mother's sense of justice and her father's strategic mind. She had a habit of questioning everything, of demanding to know why things were the way they were, and both parents secretly loved it, even when it made parenting challenging. On a quiet evening, with Maria asleep upstairs and rain pattering against the windows, Alexandra and Damien sat in their living room, comfortable in the silence. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Alexandra asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "If you'd fired me that day, if I'd backed down?" "Every day," Damien admitted. "I think about how close I came to staying exactly as I was, lonely and isolated, and convinced that was the only way to be powerful. And then I think about how grateful I am that you were brave enough to tell me the truth." "We were both brave," Alexandra said. "You had to be brave enough to listen, to change, to admit you'd been wrong. That's harder than speaking up." "Maybe," Damien agreed. "But I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me what was possible. You believed in a version of me that I didn't even know existed." Alexandra lifted her head to look at him. "That version was always there. You just needed someone to help you find it." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a kiss that spoke of years of shared history and decades of future yet to come. Outside, Chicago sparkled in the rain, indifferent to the miracle that had unfolded within its borders. Two people who had found each other through defiance, who had chosen truth over convenience, who had proved that integrity and success weren't mutually exclusive. And in a small Soho cafe that remained unchanged by time, couples still met over coffee. Arguments still sparked over small tables. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone found the courage to say no to power and yes to possibility. Because that's where all the best love stories begin. Not with perfection, but with truth. Not with ease, but with courage. Not with someone who completes you, but with someone who challenges you to complete yourself. The Ruthless CEO had tested his assistants, and only one had dared to say no. But in that refusal, both of them had found something infinitely more valuable than compliance. They'd found each other. They'd found themselves. And they'd discovered that the greatest power of all comes not from commanding others, but from having the courage to be vulnerable, to change, to love fiercely and honestly in a world that often rewards neither honesty nor love. If this story moved you, if you believe that standing up for yourself is worth more than any paycheck, subscribe to hear more stories about courage, transformation, and love that defies expectations. Leave a like if you've ever had to choose between your integrity and your job, and let me know in the comments what choice you made. Because your story matters too. Your courage matters. And somewhere, someone needs to hear that it's possible to say no to what's wrong and yes to what's right, even when it's terrifying. Even when you have everything to lose. Because sometimes, when you risk everything, you gain something you never knew you needed. You gain yourself.